My name is Rachel MacNeil. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, and I am so excited to present to you today Running for Life. So recovery and injury prevention to ensure that we can get out on the road for as long as we want to. So first of all, congratulations on undertaking this journey. And also thank you for the work that you do for Easterseals, work that I think is very important. Believe it or not, running can be fun, or I think it can be fun. I started running myself at a time when I lived in San Francisco. I was always running the same 3-mile loop at breakneck speed. I hated every minute of my runs. And as soon as it was done, I told myself I would never do it again. And finally, I met a more seasoned runner than me who said, you know, if you don't like it, what would happen if you just slowed down as slow as you needed to enjoy it? And so I started doing that, and certainly I began enjoying it, and speed came later. So even if you're not feeling like a runner today or not loving every moment of your training, trust that you can get there. And as long as you take it slow and do the stuff you enjoy, you will get there. So a little bit about me. As I mentioned, I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I'm also a certified Roadrunners Clubs of America running coach, and was an official coach for the San Francisco Marathon training program. I personally have run 4 road marathons, 1 ultra marathon on trail, and numerous half marathons, 10Ks and 5Ks. I don't want to jinx myself, and certainly it involved a great deal of luck, but I've also been running injury-free myself for 15 years. So I feel like that's a decent endorsement for what I'm about to share with you. One quick disclaimer about this presentation. So obviously, everything I'm about to say today is not a substitute for medical advice. If you are starting a new exercise program like this one, or if you develop aches and pains during your training and are kind of wondering what's going on, of course, seek the advice of a medical professional. Okay, so first, why do we get injured? In general, injury happens when what we demand of our tissue, so that's our muscles, our cardiovascular system, the connective tissues in our joints, when what we demand of it exceeds what they're capable of withstanding. So I like to say to all my patients, our bodies adapt till the day we die. It doesn't matter how old we are, but it doesn't happen overnight. So if we do too much too soon, our tissues eventually have to give up, resulting in pain and injury for us. So I think a great example is this Couch to 5K program, right? If you were to get out tomorrow and try to run that 5K, at best, you'd be sore after. And at worst, you may have pain or injury that would prevent you from getting out there again for weeks and sometimes even months. So just even joining this training, you can already appreciate that it takes gradual gains and slow steps along the training process to reach a goal. And taking that time is really what helps to prevent injury. So there's this cycle during our training that involves introducing a new challenge, adapting to that challenge or allowing our tissues to adapt to that challenge, integrating the tissue adaptation, and then introducing new challenge, continuing the cycle. And so this can happen on a weekly basis, a monthly basis. That will really vary with the training program you're using and your coaching. But it's important that we do this slowly, as I said. And when injury does arise, we can ask ourselves, where did the adaptation break down? So did I introduce too much challenge too soon? Is there some deficit in my tissues, a deficit of strength, endurance, or flexibility that is making me more prone to injury? Or did I maybe not take the time to allow my recovering tissues to rest? So overcoming injury really requires us to address these root causes. We're not going to be able to identify your specific root causes if you're dealing with aches and pains in this presentation. Like I said, that's best done with a medical professional. But we can talk about kind of some of the general things that we see or most commonly when we run today. And also some of the ways that we do have it within our control to prevent injury and recover from injury when it does happen. So if we're dealing with alignment issues, oftentimes that can be improved or resolved with selective strengthening. Flexibility issues obviously can be addressed with stretching. And when we're dealing with issues of timing and control, or neuromuscular control or motor control, you may have heard it called, we can improve that with a proper warm-up and with training in speed and agility. And I'm going to get to do some of that with you all toward the end of this presentation. So again, determining your own root causes, pretty important to address what's really going on, not just all the symptoms. And we'll do some of that here, but really seek professional help as needed. All right, so avoiding injury requires consistent body maintenance and a gradual increase in demand to allow for proper adaptation, right? So we can help our tissues adapt to demand with body maintenance and by avoiding overtraining. So what do I mean by body maintenance? So let's consider a little bit the impact of running, right? You have to have all of your body weight land on one leg and with considerable speed and force. So more demand than typical walking would require. And then if you consider that you're doing this over the course of many miles, many repetitions, that takes a lot of strength, flexibility, and endurance from all of the tissues that are involved to make sure that we can do that capably and without injuring ourselves. So it's pretty smart to include weekly strengthening routines. I'll share some of my favorite strength moves today, but working with a personal trainer or even seeking out resources online, there's a lot out there that can help with that. But focusing, we used to think that it was good to do mostly body weight exercise for runners, and that's still important and has its place. But now we also realize that we can actually lift heavy for runners and that we want to do squats and deadlifts, things like that, that in the early term will negatively impact our performance, right, as we're adapting to the strength training that we're doing. But if we do it early enough in the training process, helps to strengthen us. So ultimately our performance is better come race day, and we help to prevent common causes of injury throughout our training cycle. Also good to do a warm-up, a moving dynamic warm-up before every run, and a cool down, often with stretching and foam rolling after running, both of which I'll be addressing today. And it's important to incorporate cross-training and appropriate rest. So more training is not necessarily good, or more is better is not necessarily our mantra. Rest is an integral part of our training, and we should plan for it. So body maintenance, number one. Number two is avoiding overtraining. As I referenced a little bit earlier, overtraining is the single biggest cause of running related injury. So the three elements of our training when we're thinking about intensity are duration, distance, and speed or hills, or kind of the demand of the workout. So I don't want to increase two of those at a time. I only want to increase any one at a time. For example, if I'm increasing the amount I'm running in a week by 20 minutes, I want my distance to stay the same. So I'm probably going to slow down a little bit, and I'm not going to introduce any new speed work or any new hill work. I'm going to take it slow. It can be hard to quantify some of these things other than distance and time. But in general, you want to think about never increasing any one of those three variables by more than 10% in a week. So okay to increase 10% week over week, but not more than that. And again, those variables are duration, distance, and speed or hills. When I was first starting out, minimalist running was all the craze, and I had a pair of shoes that were probably a decade old that I'd been running in college, and I thought, well, people are running barefoot, how much can it matter? Who cares? I'm going to take these beat up shoes, go out for a whole bunch of runs. And as I mentioned, once I enjoyed myself, once I had kind of the secret to enjoying myself, I wanted to go out every day. I wanted to do more and more and more. And I quickly developed some lower leg pain, and to make a long story short, ended up having a stress fracture from overtraining, which had me have to cancel my first race and start all over again the following season. So pretty big disappointment. All of that eagerness early in my training clearly hurt me in the long run. So I would definitely, I can't emphasize enough to avoid overtraining. Okay, this slide just shows you a little bit about running injury frequency. So as you can see, the knee is most commonly injured, the most common injury we see in the clinic. That's stuff like runner's knee, IT band syndrome, which I'm going to be talking about shortly. Injuries of the lower leg, commonly shin splints, sometimes Achilles tendinopathy, and then of the foot and ankle. So we're talking there about plantar fasciitis. That doesn't encompass all of the injuries, certainly. As I mentioned, there's stress fractures, there's overuse injuries of muscles and tendons, lots of different things that can happen. But I'm going to be going over the most common ones today. Okay, so a quick word on pain. So some pain as our tissues adapt is normal. There's something called delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS, you may have heard of it, where anytime if we take on a new lifting program, even if you take on a new walking program, if you haven't been walking very much, you will experience that your muscles will be sore the day after that exertion, and even worse, probably 2 days following that exertion. So that feels like achiness. It may be hard to do your kind of normal functional activities, getting up and down from the chair, navigating stairs, things like that. But it's really that, it's achy. If you're experiencing pain that is sharp, that gets worse over time instead of better, things like that. Those are reasons to consider seeking out a medical professional. So also, muscle aches and pains are normal as long as they're not sharp. Joint pain is less normal, things like that. So anything sharp, again, reason to get checked out. Also, you really don't ever want to have pain during a run that exceeds kind of a 2 out of 10 on that numeric pain scale. So if 0 is no pain at all, 10 is scream and take me to the ER, and 5 is moderate pain, I never really want to be more than a 2 out of 10. And I certainly don't want to see my pain increasing over the course of a run, right? Not a great sign. And for the record too, pain, it's not heavy breathing or feeling like something's hard, right? That's normal stuff. You are going to breathe heavy. It is going to feel hard at times. You are going to want to stop. It's more that acute sharp stuff that we're talking about, where your body's trying to send a message to your brain to tell you, it's not just that we're tired, something really isn't right and is requiring our attention. So assuming we are having that kind of acute sharp pain, something more than delayed onset muscle soreness, in the early phase of that, so for the first week or two anyway, we really want to pursue rest or gentle pain-free motion. So pain-free motion could be on a bike for a short period of time. It could be a gentle walk in the neighborhood, anything that doesn't light up your pain, certainly above that 2 out of 10. You may have heard RICE in the past, right? Rest, ICE is the next one, definitely can be employed in the early stages. Also compression and elevation, especially if you're dealing with swelling. So elevating the affected extremity above the level of your heart can be helpful. And then taking over-the-counter pain medications as appropriate. So that could be acetaminophen or Tylenol, depending on the injury, or NSAIDs like ibuprofen, Advil. One disclaimer, and I'll mention this again later when we're talking about injury, is if you're concerned that you have an injury related to connective tissue, like tendon, cartilage, stuff like that, we generally want to avoid ibuprofen. That can counter healing. So acetaminophen in those cases, plantar fasciitis too, acetaminophen over ibuprofen. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the most common injuries that I referenced. The first one and the most common one, as I mentioned, being runner's knee. So runner's knee feels like pain just below the kneecap. And actually, if you can see me, we're talking kind of just distal to my kneecap. If this is my kneecap, just distal to it. It can also feel like pain behind the kneecap. Your knee may feel unstable. It may snap, crackle, or pop. It might be swollen. This is sometimes caused by weak muscles around the hip, which is going to be a common theme for a lot of these injuries you'll find. Can also be decreased flexibility of the muscles in the front or back of the thighs, so thinking about the quad and the hamstring. It's important, as I mentioned earlier, if you're running and dealing with knee pain, always to make sure that pain stays less than 2 out of 10, never exceeding that, stopping if it is exceeding that. Patellar taping can sometimes work. I would not start any taping program without first seeing a medical professional who can really show you how to tape properly. But also strengthening and stretching in general is going to be better than taping. So those are kind of the most sustainable things we can do to be injury-free. Taping can work in the short term, especially when we think about kind of trying to fire muscles that we may not be used to firing. Taping can help to cue us to do some of that firing. But in general, our muscles themselves are going to be the strongest thing we have to hold everything in great alignment. Strengthening for runner's knee is best done with the foot flat on the ground. So I'm thinking of squats, deadlifts. If you're doing a leg press, you would obviously have your feet flat on the foot plate. So just avoiding exercise where the foot's in free space. So I'm not really doing any of these kinds of motions like the leg extension machine, nothing like that, if I can avoid it. You also, with runner's knee, or really with any of the injuries that I'm going to talk about today, you need to be strong enough that when you land on that single foot, like I talked about earlier, the hip doesn't collapse, the knee doesn't collapse in, everything stays properly aligned. And you're going to be able to do that by both establishing what good control feels like in your body, but also by having the hip and lower extremity strength to support landing on a stable leg. Certainly improving core strength can help with that as well. And engaging a lean. So there's a book I really love if you want to geek out about running form and kind of all the different ways that you can use form to address injury prevention. Chi Running is a favorite book of mine. There are 6 form focuses or foci that also, if a run is getting kind of boring, I like to think about some of the form focuses and see which ones I can integrate. Gives you a little something to think about. But chief among them is that we want to kind of be leaning forward with an upright posture when we run. So if you feel like you're leaning backward, or even if you're straight up and down, trying to engage a little bit of a lean from the ankle while keeping the waist nice and straight can be another great way of addressing runner's knee. Plantar fasciitis, super, super common. So this is heel pain or arch pain that's most obvious when you first get out of bed in the morning. Certainly seeing a physical therapist early with plantar fasciitis can really decrease the healing time. So I would recommend that no matter what, as can the proper footwear for both running and hanging out. So you really don't want to wear flip-flops or unsupportive slippers, even when you're just kind of hanging out at the house. And taping and orthotics can sometimes be helpful here. So I would definitely recommend for plantar fasciitis that you go get your gait analyzed at a reputable running store. I know I'm biased. I love Runner's Alley. There are certainly other ones in New Hampshire that you could check out, but make sure you're in the proper footwear and not just kind of something that you found online for yourself or at Dick's Sporting Goods. There are a lot of professionals out there. As I mentioned, with plantar fasciitis, you want to have acetaminophen instead of ibuprofen for pain. Stretching your calves with the knee bent and straight can be helpful. I'll be demonstrating that later. And as I mentioned, always wearing proper footwear is key. Okay, so IT band syndrome, we're talking about your iliotibial band. When you have IT band syndrome, it's because there is some soft tissue that is tensioning over a bony part of the lower thigh bone with every time that you straighten or bend the knee. So people usually feel this outside the knee and just proximal. So if you kind of have your hand next to your knee at the outside and bring it a little bit closer to the hip, it's usually right about there, but it can radiate all up the outside of your thigh. Pain usually comes on later in the run, so you notice it toward the end. And this is often, no surprise, just like runner's knee, caused by weak hip stabilizers. So when we go to land on that single leg, we don't quite have the strength or the endurance to do it with a lot of stability. So there's an exercise we'll be talking about shortly to help to deal with that. If symptoms of IT band syndrome don't get better after 8 weeks or so of conservative management, as I'm describing, sometimes you'll want to get a steroid injection. So certainly, hopefully you've seen a medical professional before it goes 8 weeks of pain. But if you get to that point, oftentimes an injection is warranted. And it can also be helpful with IT band syndrome to make sure that your running stance is not too narrow. So as you're running and your feet are side by side, not keeping them too close to each other, but kind of trying to keep them about hip width. Can sometimes help with IT band syndrome. Or if you do a lot of work on the track, mixing up the direction you go so you're not always running on the bank in the same way. All helpful. Okay, shin splints. So shin splints are shin pain that gets worse over the course of a run. Shin splints are the result of pure overtraining. So it won't get better until your training loads are reduced and your tissues had a chance to heal. And for that reason, shin splints can take a while to overcome. And it can be important to do pain-free cross training in the meantime, since you will probably be off your feet running for so long. So being on the stationary bike can be helpful. Getting on the elliptical can be helpful. You also can introduce graded calf strengthening and stretching in the early phases in the meantime, as long as it's pretty pain-free. Okay, so we've talked about a whole number of running issues or the most common running related injuries. Regardless of the injury we're dealing with, cadence is really king. Cadence is a great way to reduce injury or the risk of injury and also to recover from injury once you have it. So cadence just refers to the number of times my feet hit the ground in a minute's time. We're talking about left and right feet. So ideally, I'm looking for 170 to 180 footfalls per minute, or if I'm counting just my right foot, for example, that would be about 90 right footfalls per minute. When you're on the run, you can use a metronome in your ear or out loud to help stick to that beat. Now there are even Spotify, and I assume other services too, playlists at this beat. So if you like to listen to music when you run, pull up something with that cadence, and if you have good rhythm, try to stick to that rhythm. Also consider that if you can hear your feet scuffing during a run, or if you're hitting the ground really hard, you're kind of just causing your body to break. So trying to land with a light footfall can really be helpful. And again, increasing that cadence. Another thing, cadence and decreasing the sound associated with your footfall. those can really be helpful with avoiding overstriding, meaning avoiding having my foot land far in front of my body with every step, but instead really keeping it under my center of mass. Another thing, I feel like I have a lot of solutions for things to do when you're bored during a run, which maybe is a personal problem. But another thing you can do during a run is a body scan. So start with your toes, and as you're out there, just work your way up every bone, joint, and muscle in your body. Just feel for tension, feel for effort, see where you can reduce the tension and the effort. Taking it as easy and relaxed as you can. And like I said, really sticking with that conversation pace for most of your runs. So not going faster than a pace that you can comfortably have a conversation at. Okay, so I'm excited now to go through some specific demos. We're going to do a warm up together, also a cool down or a selective cool down. If you're looking for more information on any of this, you can find me on Instagram. I'll put that up at the end as well. I certainly post videos there. And you can reach out to me as well. I'll share that information later. But for now, let's enjoy a warm up together. All right, so I'm happy now to show you actually the warm up that I personally do before every run. Parts of this are adapted from Chi Running, the book that I mentioned earlier, which I would highly recommend. There are also a lot of videos online related to different warm-ups and Chi Running warm-ups. But as I mentioned, before we go out to run, we really want to focus on dynamic movement. So not holding any stretch for any period of time, really trying to get going. So the first thing I like to do is warm up my joints from the ground up. So starting with my toes and ankles, I do 10 circles in one direction. And once I've gotten to 10 circles in the other direction. And I'm not going to go through all the reps today. I'll give you a sense of them, but you should do all 10 before every run. Doesn't matter if it's a short run or a long run. So both directions here for my toes and ankles. Moving up, I'm going to bring my knees in a circle, 10 directions or 10 circles one way. And once I've gotten to 10 the other way. And something I really like about this warm up too is as I move up the body, the joints that I've already warmed up further down still are getting the motion. So I'm kind of like warming myself up as I go, feeling my joints, getting them ready to move, kind of getting everything online, working together. Same thing with my hips, figure 8s for 10. And they talk about going 10 times in one direction with this and 10 times in the other. I don't feel a difference in direction, so I just do 10 figure 8s. I think that's fine. Right, back and forth. Then to warm up my upper back, 10 times with an absolutely relaxed arm, as long as it doesn't hurt my shoulders. Twisting back and forth. And my feet are planted right now, but you can even lift the heel to get a little more movement all down the body. Good. Then I'll put my hands behind my head, again, to warm up my spine, looking down at my opposite heel each time. Good. And then I might take some movement that feels good to me. So I might swing out my hips. You can kind of bend your knees, whatever you think you need to do to warm up more of your joints. Once I've done that, kind of all the way up the chain, then I start to do some brief strengthening that's going to help to activate the muscles that I really need to use when I'm running. So if I get them kind of activated and online before I go out there, there's going to be a better chance that they're there for me when I need them and that they're going to be functioning properly, right? I've already kind of woken them up and gotten them prepared. So some exercises I like to do, squats. Right, and I'm doing these unweighted as my warm-up. These are similar to a lot of the exercises I mentioned doing just for strengthening overall. Also what are called good mornings. So kind of bending from the hip, keeping my back nice and flat and up. You can get a little movement in your upper back too by keeping the hands behind the head with that one. And then, like I said, I also want to kind of warm up my nervous system. So I want to get my body used to the control that it's going to take to land on one foot every time without collapsing. So I'm going to want to do some stuff on one leg. And for the stuff I'm about to show you now, but also for the stuff I'm going to show you with recovery in just a few minutes, you really want to make sure that you're staying tall through your hip. So I see people a lot do what I call like a beach sachet, where they walk and they collapse. That's exactly what we want to avoid with this stuff. So whenever I'm standing on one leg, whether I'm just standing there statically or doing a hop or anything like that, I really want to stay up tall, not collapsed. So tall versus collapsed. So consider that with the last little bit of warm up, where again, I'm priming my nervous system. I'm getting it ready to be stable and strong for all of those many times I'm going to land on one foot. So hopping, bounding even on one foot, right? Getting some distance with that, or doing skips. Really anything you can do on one leg, working to be as stable as possible is really going to help you with that warm up. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my favorite recovery exercises, which is on the next slide. Perfect. Okay, so for recovery, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do. I would really recommend like stretching where you feel most tight. I'll demonstrate some foam rolling to you, but there's really no kind of magic way to cool down other than to address any kind of issues that you need to in your body. So I just wanted to share today, I mentioned earlier, there's some stretching you can do if you have plantar fasciitis. Not a bad thing to do anyway. And I mentioned being sure that you get a calf stretch with both your knee bent and straightened. So knee bent can look like this. I'm keeping my heel down, stretching forward. If I'm trying to get just a straight up stretch, holding for at least 30 seconds is key. You can hold really up to 2 minutes if you want to. But in this case, I also want to work a little bit of mobility at my ankle if I'm talking about plantar fasciitis specifically. So I'm going to work on driving the knee forward and back, getting as much motion out of that hip as I can, or excuse me, out of that ankle. So I'm working my left leg here, some mobility, some stretch and holds. Again, I'll be doing that for 30 seconds. And then still working my left leg, bringing it behind me and getting a nice calf stretch here with the knee straight. So I've done knee bent, I've done knee straight, working on getting my calf nice and limber. Perfect. And I'm going to demonstrate one hip strengthener before I get down on the floor and do some things on the floor with you. It's actually my favorite hip strengthener. I was a little bit hesitant to do it in this medium because I think it can be hard to see, but I think you'll get the idea. And if you can do it, it's one of my favorite running exercises. So I'm standing close to a wall. The closer I am to the wall, the harder this exercise, or excuse me, the easier this exercise is going to be. So when I'm right here, it's super easy. When I'm out here, dang, it's going to be really hard. So I want to stay nice and close, bend the knee closest to the wall while it points straight down. And then I'm pressing it into the wall. And believe it or not, really feeling my hip and my butt work on that standing leg. And the reason I like this one so much is if you think about running, like I talked about earlier, my hip has to be super strong to land on one leg over and over and over again. This is a really functional way to strengthen that hip. So again, you can't tell, but I'm pressing into the wall here and I feel my right glute active. If I flip it around here, again, closer to the wall is going to be easier. I'm bending and I'm pressing in to the wall there. Really now feeling my left glute active. Doesn't look like much, but in the clinic, people are always really surprised with how difficult that exercise can be. I try to do 10 for 10-second holds. Think about the endurance it takes to be able to do that over and over and over again with running. So if 10 times 10 seconds feels hard, work up from there, but imagine running takes a lot more demand than that. So a strengthener definitely worth incorporating. And now I'm going to take it to the ground and do a little bit of strengthening and foam rolling down there. Okay, so I just demonstrated a hip strengthener against the wall. Again, that's my favorite one because I feel like it's super, super functional for landing on that single leg, but just wanted to demonstrate. So some other hip strengtheners, maybe you've done clams on the floor before. There's kind of the traditional ones. You can get into some funkier ones. Also putting a resistance band around your thighs and sidestepping across the floor can be a great way to strengthen your hips as well. So another option there. I also wanted to demonstrate on the floor just how to use a foam roller and some other tools for soft tissue work. So there's not a lot of great evidence to support that we can break up fascia or tissue in that way. However, I can't deny the first marathon I ever ran, I did nothing for recovery after, and I was in extreme pain. I could barely go up and down stairs. And I said, never again. Since then, I've been foam rolling after every race, and I've never had that experience again. So chalk it up to better training. Probably that's most of it, but certainly foam rolling probably doesn't hurt, can bring some added circulation to an area, and also help to work out some of the lactic acid and byproducts of exercising when we use it. So I'm going to be demonstrating with my bigger foam roller, but I just want to point out, so there's these little balls, kind of looks like a hard tennis ball, but really tiny, golf ball sized. And you can use this to rub the bottom of your foot. Can be useful for plantar fasciitis, some mixed information on that, but can bring some pain relief anyway for that. And then I have here, they sell these little massage balls. This is actually just a lacrosse ball. The density is pretty much the same. They're definitely under $10 at a lot of sports stores. So you don't have to spend the money on kind of fancy gear. A lacrosse ball will do just fine. I actually found one of these on the side of the road the other day. And the lacrosse ball, you know, you can put that under your hip, you can put that under any spot that's kind of tender. When you get to a spot that's sore, hanging out there until that soreness dissipates a little bit can be great. I love it for hips and glutes most of all. But certainly you could even put it under your hamstrings or your quads. It's just kind of a more pinpoint pressure. So some people find that that's a little too intense depending on what they've got going on. So, the foam roller. Foam roller is just a great tool. You can use it for a lot of mobility work in the future, even if you're not using it specifically for running. But I do like it for loosening up my lower body. If I do two legs at once, obviously that's not going to be as intense or as painful as if I do one leg at a time, especially if I'm using the opposite leg to add weight to the leg that I'm working on. But in this way, I can kind of roll up my whole body. Again, when I feel something that's tender or feels a little tight, I can hang out there statically. So just kind of relaxing, resting and putting pressure on it. Or I can roll a bit up and down. I find that behind my knees are super, super tender. Rolling on the foam roller can feel great. So again, all the way back up my thighs, right? And then when I get up to my glutes here, I can even incorporate some stretching while I'm on it, rolling back and forth on my hips. And you can even use it for some upper body and some back work, as the case may be in the future. So just some tips, some kind of brief exercises you can do for recovery. Like I said, the options are endless. You really want to address your particular aches, pains, deficits, things like that. Working with your coaches, working with personal trainers, certainly working with physical therapists can help you establish a program that is unique to you and addresses all of your kind of root causes that we talked about earlier. Great. So that really concludes the entirety of my presentation with you. There's a very last slide that has some of my contact information on it. So you can see my web address, you can see my Instagram and Facebook handles. I admittedly don't love social media, but please check me out there. As I mentioned, that warm-up routine is actually posted to my Instagram. You can see it there. And I also have my phone number posted. So please, I always do 30-minute consults for free off the bat. But if you have any kind of aches, pains, running injuries, or just want kind of some coaching to improve your running, I would be happy to help you. Again, congratulations, awesome achievement. I hope this leads to a lifetime of loving running. Thank you.